The Wayfarer Hale hung in space like a wounded animal. Its hull was scratched and dented, a dull gray under the light of a distant sun. The ship had drifted out of its normal path and was now stranded near the edge of a busy trade corridor. For years, it had been considered impossible to repair. 28 engineers had tried, all the best in the galaxy, and all had failed. Each report ended with the same words: beyond repair. The crew of the Wayfarer Hale had given up hope, except for a single human traveling with his daughter. Evan Brooks had never intended to be a hero. He was a quiet man, with a calm face and tired eyes, carrying the weight of years of work and responsibility. He had spent his life fixing things. Not spaceships like this, not giant alien engines or massive star drives, but small machines, tools, and gadgets. He fixed household robots, small transport vehicles, and even old engines that other humans had thrown away. That experience had taught him patience, careful observation, and creativity. Most importantly, it had taught him that sometimes the simplest solution was the right one. Evan's daughter, Lily, was small, no more than 8 years old, with bright eyes that shone with curiosity. She had grown up listening to stories about space and adventure, though she had never expected to live them herself. She stayed close to her father as they moved through the corridors of the ship. Her small hands clutched a worn, stuffed toy, a relic from Earth, while her gaze moved from one damaged panel to another. She did not understand the technical details, but she understood her father, and he understood her. The aliens in charge of the repairs were different. They were tall, with long limbs and eyes that seemed to reflect the stars themselves. They spoke in sharp, clicking tones that human ears could barely follow. Their technology was advanced, far beyond human tools, but their thinking was rigid. They had trained for years to repair and control ships like the Wayfarer Hale, yet they could not see the problem. They argued constantly among themselves, blaming old parts, corrupted systems, and even the ship itself for failing to respond. They seemed to think the machine had chosen to die, and there was nothing anyone could do to save it. Evan watched quietly, leaning against a railing and studying the alien engineers as they moved from panel to panel. He noticed things they did not. Small sparks in circuits that were ignored, wires slightly out of place, systems showing minor warning signals that they dismissed as normal. To him, these were clues. The ship was not broken beyond repair, it was confused. It had a pattern that only someone patient and careful could understand. And Evan was patient. He moved slowly through the ship, careful not to touch anything important, observing the way the power flowed, the way lights flickered, the way the systems whispered to each other. Each step brought a new detail into view. A vent was slightly misaligned, causing airflow problems. A control panel had a minor short that caused strange readings. The main core, the part the engineers had all focused on, was not dead. It was locked in a safety loop, refusing to start until it understood that the ship was safe. To the aliens, this looked like corruption. To Evan, it looked like a scared child hiding from danger. "Daddy, why are they saying it can't be fixed?" Lily asked, her voice small and hesitant. She had followed him into one of the lower maintenance corridors, where the hum of the ship was softer. Her eyes were wide, reflecting both fear and wonder. "They don't understand it, Lily," Evan said softly. "Sometimes people see something they cannot fix and think it is impossible, but that doesn't mean it is." He crouched down beside her, pointing to a small panel that blinked irregularly. "See this? It's just waiting for someone to listen carefully." Lily tilted her head. "Can you fix it, Daddy?" Evan smiled, a tired but hopeful smile. "We'll see. Sometimes it takes a long time to understand a problem before you can solve it. That's the hard part." The human crew and passengers on the Wayfarer Hale had mostly withdrawn to their quarters. Many had been stranded for weeks, unable to travel, and unsure of their fate. Rumors had spread about the ship's condition, about the engineers who had tried and failed. Some whispered that the vessel was cursed, that it had been touched by bad luck, or worse, that it was doomed. But Evan did not believe in curses. He believed in understanding. He started to trace the ship's main circuits, using only the tools he had brought with him. They were simple by alien standards: a few wrenches, a datapad, and some handheld scanners. The aliens watched him with disbelief, muttering among themselves. They did not recognize his method. He did not start with calculations, diagrams, or complex algorithms. He started by touching the ship, listening to it, noticing patterns. He asked small questions. Where does this lead? Why is this off? What happens if I shift this slightly? Hours passed. The aliens took breaks, spoke to each other in urgent tones, and tried again to force their methods on the ship, all failing. Evan moved steadily, his mind calm, his hands careful. He would stop, adjust a wire, tap a panel, watch a screen, and wait. Each small adjustment caused minor reactions, little signs that the ship was responding. To the aliens, nothing happened. But to Evan, each flicker, each beep, was a conversation. Lily stayed by his side most of the time, her curiosity endless. She asked questions, watched his hands, and sometimes helped in small ways. Holding a flashlight, pressing buttons he pointed out, or handing him tools. She did not understand the full complexity of what he was doing, but she understood the rhythm, she understood patience, and she understood her father's quiet confidence. By the end of the first day, Evan had mapped much of the problem. The core was trapped in a feedback loop, caused by a minor malfunction in the safety relay. The aliens had never noticed it because it was hidden behind layers of redundant systems. Evan had seen the pattern by following the flow of energy and understanding the ship's intention, what it was trying to do, rather than what it was failing to do. It was simple thinking, human thinking. Look at what is, see what is meant to be, and connect the dots. That night, the ship's corridors were quiet. The alien engineers had retreated to their quarters, frustrated and unsure of what to do next. Evan stayed near the main core, Lily curled up on a small chair beside him, reading a small book she had brought. The hum of the ship was soft but steady now, a gentle vibration that seemed to welcome him. It was the first sign of life the vessel had shown in months. "Do you think it will work, Daddy?" Lily whispered, closing her book and leaning against his shoulder. Evan stroked her hair. "I hope so. But even if it doesn't, we will understand more tomorrow than we did today. That is what matters." He looked at the blinking lights, the subtle patterns in the panels, and felt a strange connection. The ship was old, yes, and damaged, but it was alive in its own way. He understood that a little more than anyone else there. When the human technicians first arrived, they had been ignored. The aliens had dismissed them as minor assistants, unable to comprehend the ship's complexity. But Evan saw that the humans had one advantage: creativity and patience. The ability to see the impossible and try anyway. That simple perspective had carried humanity far across the stars, and now it was the only thing that might save the wayfarer Hale. By the time the second day began, Evan had formed a plan. He would not rush the repairs. He would follow the ship's systems slowly, carefully, and with thought. Every cable, every panel, every circuit had a story. He would listen to those stories, and only then would he make his move. The aliens might not understand his methods, and they might scoff at his simple tools, but he did not care. He knew something they did not. Sometimes, the answer was not in power or knowledge, but in attention, patience, and love for what you were trying to fix. And in the quiet corridors of the stranded ship, Evan began the first step. He took a deep breath, placed his hands on the main control panel, and let the ship speak to him. The lights flickered once, then twice, as if acknowledging his presence. It was a small start, but it was enough. For the first time in months, hope returned to the wayfarer Hale. Not the hope of the experts or the engineers, but the quiet, steady hope of a human father who had learned that no problem was too great if you looked carefully enough. As Evan worked, he thought of Lily, of her trust in him, of the simple lessons he had learned on Earth. Machines could be stubborn, systems could be confusing, but every problem had a solution. Sometimes, you just needed to care enough to find it. And that care, that patience, and that human perspective might be the key to saving more than just a ship. It might show the galaxy something they had forgotten. That humans, simple and small, could achieve the impossible. The first part of the repair would be slow. It would take hours, maybe days. The aliens would watch, doubt, and probably criticize. But Evan did not mind. He had something they did not: understanding, focus, and a quiet determination. And in the vast emptiness of space, with his daughter by his side, that might be enough. The second day on the Wayfarer, Hale began slowly. The ship hummed faintly, almost as if it were breathing after months of silence. Evan had spent the night reviewing every panel he had touched, every circuit he had observed. Lily had slept beside him in a small chair, curled up with her book and blanket. She trusted her father completely, and she had learned to be patient as well. Space was a place of waiting, but it was also a place of surprises. And today, they would see a small one. The aliens began their morning routine early. They moved through the corridors with long, precise steps, their eyes flicking over the panels and wires. They whispered among themselves in rapid clicks and tones that Evan could barely understand. To them, the human and his daughter were amusing at best, irrelevant at worst. They had spent their lives studying ships, engines, and star drives. How could a human, with a few hand tools and no formal advanced training, do anything they could not? They would soon learn. Evan started where he had left off. He knelt in front of a control panel that had resisted all previous attempts at repair. The lights blinked in irregular patterns, and tiny sparks popped from wires that had not been touched for years. Most engineers would have panicked at the sight, but Evan was calm. He touched the wires carefully, feeling the heat and flow of electricity. He adjusted a small connection, barely moving it, and stepped back. The panel flickered, then settled for a moment, then flickered again. It was responding, slowly, cautiously. "Daddy, is it working?" Lily whispered, leaning against his shoulder. Her small hands rested on his arm, steady and trusting. "Almost, Lily." "The ship is just being shy," Evan said, smiling. "It wants to know that it can trust us." He moved to another panel nearby, tracing a wire that seemed disconnected from its main flow. The aliens had never noticed it, assuming it was irrelevant. But Evan had learned to look for the small things, the tiny details that could make all the difference. He adjusted the wire, then checked the readings on his pad. The numbers shifted slightly. It was a tiny change, but to Evan, it meant everything. The aliens watched him with increasing suspicion. One of them, a tall engineer named Xylar, approached. "You are wasting your time, human," Xylar said, his voice sharp and clicking. "The ship's systems are beyond repair. Your actions will only cause more damage." Evan did not respond immediately. He studied Xylar carefully, then returned to the panel. "I know it looks bad," he said finally. "But sometimes the answer is not force or strength. Sometimes it is patience and observation. You are trying to fix it the way it should be fixed. In theory. I'm trying to fix it the way it actually works." Xylar's eyes narrowed. He had never heard a human speak like this. The other alien engineers murmured, some in disbelief, some in quiet annoyance. They had spent weeks on this ship, following every protocol, using every tool, and failing. And now, a single human, with a few simple tools, was showing results that they could not. It was impossible. Yet, there it was. Evan moved to the main core, the heart of the ship. It was large and intimidating, with layers of circuits, panels, and energy conduits. Most engineers would have approached it with fear, using complex calculations to predict outcomes. Evan did not. He touched the surface, feeling the vibrations, listening to the faint hums. The core was alive in its own way. It was frightened, locked in its safety protocols, refusing to start because it feared damage. Evan understood fear. He understood machines. He understood humans. And he knew that if he approached carefully, the core would respond. He began the delicate work of rerouting small safety loops, circuits that had become entangled over decades. The aliens had considered these systems unbreakable, locked forever in complex patterns. Evan moved slowly, adjusting connections by hand, following the flow of energy like a river. Every adjustment was minor, almost invisible. But together, they formed a new path for the ship's systems to awaken. He worked with focus and calm, never rushing, never panicking. Lily sat nearby, watching with wide eyes, occasionally handing him a tool he needed. Hours passed, and small successes began to appear. Lights that had remained dark for years flickered faintly. Screens that had only shown errors now displayed normal readings. The ship responded to Evan's touch, as if it had been waiting for him all along. The aliens could not believe what they were seeing. They moved closer, whispering in clicks and tones, trying to analyze his methods. But Evan did not use formulas or diagrams. He used understanding. He used observation. He used patience. And it worked. By midday, Evan had reached a major breakthrough. A panel controlling the ship's gravity systems had been completely ignored by the previous engineers. They had assumed it was fried beyond repair. Evan looked at it, noticed a small misalignment in the control matrix, and adjusted it carefully. The ship shivered lightly, as if waking from a long sleep. Gravity stabilized in the lower decks. Crew members who had feared floating into the walls began moving normally again. The aliens were stunned. "Impossible," Xylar muttered, barely audible. How did he do that?" "Simple observation," Evan said quietly. "Sometimes the solution is right in front of you. You just have to notice it." Xylar turned away, clearly uncomfortable with a human showing skill that he could not match. The other engineers whispered among themselves, some embarrassed, others frustrated. For the first time, the superiority they had felt over humans was challenged, not by a weapon or a calculation, but by patience, attention, and care. Evan did not seek recognition. He did not need the approval of the aliens. His focus remained on the ship, tracing circuits, testing responses, listening to the subtle hums and clicks. Every minor success built confidence, both for him and for the crew who had watched silently. The ship was responding, slowly but surely. And Evan knew that the major systems could be brought back online with continued careful work. Meanwhile, Lily explored nearby corridors. She was small, curious, and fearless in a way humans often were when they trusted those around them. She noticed small things that adults overlooked. A panel slightly misaligned. A vent with a loose latch. A faint sound that indicated a minor leak. She pointed these things out to her father, who smiled and nodded, using her observations to guide some minor repairs. It was a team effort, even if the team was only 2 humans against 30 skeptical aliens. As evening approached, Evan paused to rest. He leaned against a railing, breathing deeply, listening to the gentle vibrations of the ship. The Wayfarer Hale was not fully repaired, but it was alive again. Lights blinked normally. Screens displayed correct data. Gravity stabilized, and the hum of energy flowed evenly. It was a start, a small but important victory. He looked at Lily, who was sitting cross-legged with her book, and felt a deep sense of pride. Together, they were doing what 28 engineers could not. The aliens gathered near the central hub, observing in silence. Some avoided Evan's eyes, embarrassed by their earlier doubts. Others tried to analyze his methods, scribbling notes on tablets, but the patterns he used did not fit their logic. It was human logic, improvisation, patience, observation, care. It was something alien minds could not fully understand, at least not yet. And that made them uneasy. In what was assigned, they had believed themselves superior. But here was proof that humans, simple and underestimated, could achieve what they could not. Evan stood near the main core, hands on his hips, thinking through the next steps. He knew the ship had more problems, more systems to awaken, more circuits to understand. But he was not afraid. He had faced difficult machines before and learned to trust his instincts. The aliens might scoff, might even try to stop him, but he knew the ship would respond to careful attention. And he had Lily to remind him why it mattered. This was not just a machine. It was a home, a vessel, and a challenge. And humans did not back down from challenges. Night fell in the star corridor outside. The distant stars glimmered through the ship's windows, tiny points of light in the vast darkness. Evan continued his work, adjusting minor systems, testing responses, taking notes, and listening. Lily fell asleep again, resting against a chair, her small chest rising and falling. Evan glanced at her, then returned to the core. He felt a quiet satisfaction. The ship was waking, and he was the one to wake it. By the end of the second day, progress was undeniable. Gravity was stable, power systems were functioning at nearly full capacity, and many of the core circuits were operational. The ship responded to Evan's adjustments in ways it had never done before. The alien engineers could no longer dismiss him. They had watched, and they had learned something uncomfortable. Humans could succeed where advanced knowledge and superior technology had failed. And this human was not even a professional starship engineer. He was just a father, a human, with patience, observation, and determination. Evan smiled faintly, touched a panel gently, and whispered, "Almost there, old friend, almost there." The ship seemed to hum in reply, a gentle vibration that traveled through the corridors, through the panels, and into the very heart of the vessel. It was not a full voice, not a human voice, but it felt alive. It felt aware. And Evan understood that this was the beginning of something more than just a repair. It was the beginning of a new chapter, a story that humans might write in ways no one else could imagine. The night passed quietly, the ship alive with small lights and gentle hums. Evan sat near the core, making small adjustments, testing circuits, and observing. He thought about the work ahead. There would be more challenges, more systems to awaken, and more skepticism to face. But he was ready. He had learned from the machine, and the machine had begun to trust him. And in that trust lay hope. Not just for the ship, but for humans, for patience, and for the power of observation over blind knowledge. Word count. To 1,610. If you want, I can write part 3 next, showing how Evan starts fully restoring the ship while the alien engineers grow more frustrated and amazed, keeping it exciting and HFY. Do you want me to continue with part 3? Write part 3. Of 1,600 words in a. And it should be interesting, and write it in third-person style, and it should be in simple and basic English. Use simple and basic English, and without hating. Absolutely. Here's part 3 of your HFY story. Written in third person, in simple and basic English, around 1,600 words, without headings, and keeping it exciting and interesting. The third day began with a quiet sense of tension in the wayfarer hail. The ship had responded to Evan's adjustments, but there was still much work to do. Systems were waking, but slowly and unevenly. Power flowed to the main engines, but the thrusters were weak and unstable. Life support was functioning, but only at minimal levels. Every corner of the ship had layers of damage, both visible and hidden. To the alien engineers, it seemed hopeless. Yet Evan moved with calm focus, as if he had expected this all along. Evan began his day near the engine core. It was a massive structure of metal and wiring, humming faintly but irregularly. Sparks jumped occasionally from areas that had resisted repair, and some conduits were hot to the touch. The aliens had tried to fix these systems before, using their precise tools and complex calculations. But they had failed. They had called in their most skilled engineers, each one with decades of experience, and each one had walked away frustrated. Evan, with his simple human tools, saw patterns they had missed. Lily followed him into the engine room, carrying a small flashlight. She liked to watch her father work, asking questions when she could, though she didn't understand the technical details. "Daddy," she said softly, "why do they keep saying it can't be fixed? You're fixing it." Evan smiled and crouched beside her. "Because, Lily, they are looking too hard. They are using their heads too much. Sometimes you have to use your hands and your eyes, and just watch. That's what I'm doing." He tapped a wire gently. "See? The ship is telling me what to do. I just have to listen." The aliens had gathered near the doorway, observing in silence. They whispered among themselves, clearly unsure how to react. Some avoided looking at Evan, embarrassed by his success. Others scribbled notes on their pads, trying to analyze his methods, but it was difficult. His approach was not based on advanced theory or complicated calculations. It was based on patience, observation, and trial. He adjusted small connections, tested reactions, and listened to the hum of the ship. To them, it seemed simple, almost primitive. To Evan, it was the key to understanding. He began rerouting minor circuits within the engine core, carefully bypassing damaged sections. Each wire he adjusted, each panel he tapped, caused subtle changes. A spark here, a flicker there. Slowly, the energy flow became steady. The hum of the engines grew stronger, more confident. He adjusted the coolant flow, fixed minor leaks, and monitored pressure readings. The ship seemed to respond to him, as if it recognized someone was finally paying attention to it in the right way. "Look, Daddy." Lily pointed to a panel where a light had gone from red to green. "It's working." "Oh, yes," Evan said quietly, smiling. "Little by little, it's waking up. That's how it works. You don't rush something like this. You give it time and care." The alien engineers were visibly frustrated. One of them, Xylar, stepped forward. "Human, stop. You are wasting time. The ship will fail again. Our systems are superior. We know what we are doing." Evan shook his head. "You know what you are doing on paper. But the ship is not on paper. It is real. It has feelings, in its own way. You have to understand it, not just calculate it." Xylar's eyes narrowed. He had never met a human who spoke with such confidence about a machine he could not fully understand. He had always assumed humans were primitive, unpredictable, and weak. Yet here was one, a single human, restoring systems that 30 skilled alien engineers had failed to repair. It was unnerving. Evan continued his work. He moved to the thruster systems, which had been a major source of failure. The main fuel conduits were damaged, and the ignition sequences were stuck in a continuous loop, refusing to fire. Alien engineers had tried to force the thrusters online, causing sparks and minor explosions. Evan approached carefully, studying the patterns of energy, the small warning signals that had been ignored. He adjusted valves, cleared blockages, and rerouted small sections of the fuel lines. Slowly, the thrusters began to respond. "See, Lily," he said. "You just have to understand what is stopping it. Once you do, it becomes easier." By midday, the Wayfarer Hail had regained most of its basic functions. Power flowed steadily, life support worked fully, gravity was stable, and the engines hummed with potential energy. The ship was alive in a way it hadn't been for months. The alien engineers moved cautiously, no longer confident enough to criticize openly, but still unwilling to fully acknowledge Evan's success. Some tried to analyze his methods, but the humans' approach did not fit into their formulas. They had never seen thinking like this before. Evan moved next to the control systems. The navigation computer had been corrupted, its memory partly erased, and its programming tangled. Alien engineers had called it lost, irreparable. Evan approached it with calm hands and a steady mind. He did not try to rewrite the programming. Instead, he examined the data paths, the logic sequences, and the failed redundancies. He realized that the problem was a simple conflict. The computer was trying to protect the ship from damage, but the protection system was conflicting with the basic functions. The computer was trapped in its own safety protocols. "Daddy, can computers get scared like the ship?" Lily asked, peering at the screen. Evan laughed softly. "Not like people, Lily, but they can be confused. And when they are confused, they stop doing their job. That's what happened here. You have to help them remember what to do." He began carefully clearing minor conflicts, rerouting data paths, and resetting memory sequences. Each step was small, almost invisible, but the results were clear. The computer responded to his touch, showing normal readings and stabilizing its output. Navigation systems began displaying correct positions and courses. The ship could see the stars again. It could move. It could live. By late afternoon, Evan had reached the communications array. It had been dead for months. Alien engineers had given up entirely. Evan inspected the wiring, cleaned corrosion, and replaced small connectors that had been ignored. Signals flickered weakly at first, then stronger, and soon the ship could communicate again. A small message was sent to nearby stations, asking for minor supplies. It was the first message in months, and it went out without error. The aliens were astonished. They whispered among themselves, realizing that this human had achieved in 3 days what they had failed to do in months. Some were embarrassed. Others were curious. They tried to mimic his methods, but their attempts failed. Their minds were trained for complexity, precision, and protocol. Evan's mind worked differently. He relied on intuition, observation, and patience. He listened to the ship instead of imposing his will upon it. And it worked. As evening fell, Evan paused to rest. Lily leaned against him, tired but happy. She had watched her father work tirelessly, seen the ship come back to life, and felt a sense of wonder she had never experienced before. The corridors were quiet, lit by steady lights, the gentle hum of systems filling the air. The ship was alive. It was safe. It was theirs. "Daddy," Lily said softly, "they didn't believe you at first. Did that bother you?" Evan shook his head. "Not really, Lily. People doubt what they don't understand. That's normal. The important thing is to keep going. The ship doesn't care what they think. It only cares what you do." The alien engineers began gathering near the central hub again. Some avoided Evan's gaze, embarrassed. Others muttered in quiet tones, trying to understand his success. The ship had responded fully to his touch, and there was no denying it. Yet they could not explain it within their own systems of logic. It was human thinking, and it was foreign to them. Evan moved to the final section he had planned for the day: the auxiliary power grids. These had been neglected for years, with damaged conduits, broken relays, and corroded connectors. Alien engineers had declared them useless. Evan examined them carefully, tracing flows of energy and checking connections. He adjusted wires, cleared blockages, and restored circuits, one by one. Slowly, power returned to the auxiliary systems. Lights brightened. Fans spun smoothly. Emergency systems were online. By nightfall, the Wayfarer Hail was fully operational, for the first time in months. Lights shone steadily, engines hummed with potential, life support flowed smoothly, gravity was stable, and navigation and communication systems were fully functional. The ship had returned to life because a human father had listened, observed, and acted with care. The alien engineers could no longer hide their astonishment. They approached Evan cautiously, their eyes wide. Some spoke in whispers, asking questions about his methods. Others simply watched in silence, unsure how to respond. Their pride had been challenged, and they did not know what to do. Evan smiled faintly, hands resting on the railing. "It wasn't magic," he said quietly. "It was attention, patience, care. That's all. Sometimes, that's enough." Lily leaned against him, exhausted but happy. "You really did it, Daddy. The ship, it's alive." "Yes, Lily," he said softly. "It's alive, and it's ready for whatever comes next." The Wayfarer Hail floated in space, a vessel reborn, humming with energy and life. And for the first time in months, hope returned to everyone on board. The ship would move again. Humans and aliens alike would see its power, and they would learn that sometimes the smallest and simplest beings, the humans who care and observe, could achieve what the greatest minds had failed to do. It was a quiet victory, but a powerful one, and it was only the beginning. The fourth day on the Wayfarer Hail began with a quiet calm. The ship had awakened fully, humming with steady energy and flowing systems. Lights glowed steadily, engines vibrated with strength. Gravity was normal throughout the decks, and life support had returned to full capacity. Even the alien engineers, who had arrived with pride and doubt, now moved cautiously, observing every action Evan took. There was tension, yes, but also respect. They did not fully understand the human methods, yet the results spoke for themselves. Evan stood near the main control deck, his hands resting on the railing as he surveyed the ship. Everything he had worked on the previous 3 days had responded perfectly. Every system that had once been labeled beyond repair now operated smoothly. He breathed in the faint hum of machinery and the soft smell of metal, warmed by power. The ship was alive, not just running, but aware in a way that only a patient observer could feel. Lily moved beside him, holding her small notebook where she had drawn pictures of the ship's panels and circuits. "Daddy, the aliens, they're watching you." Evan nodded. "Yes, Lily. They've never seen anyone do what I've done. That makes them nervous. But it's okay. They'll learn." The alien engineers, led by Xylar, gathered near the central hub. Xylar stepped forward, his tall frame rigid and eyes fixed on Evan. "Human," he said, voice sharp, but quieter than before. "You have restored systems that 30 of our best engineers could not. We do not understand how. Explain yourself." Evan looked at him calmly. "There's nothing to explain, really. I didn't use formulas or complex calculations. I watched the ship, I listened to it, and I fixed the things that were wrong. I used attention, patience, and care. That's all." Xylar's eyes narrowed. "Yes," Evan said simply. "Sometimes you don't fix something by forcing it. You fix it by understanding it. The alien engineers exchanged quiet clicks and murmurs. They had been trained for decades, taught to follow rules, to use knowledge, to apply power. And yet, all of their training had failed to bring the ship back. And now, one human, a father with simple tools, had done it. The idea was uncomfortable, almost insulting to their pride, but undeniable. It was proof that humans, underestimated and simple, could achieve what the greatest minds could not. Evan moved to the main engines. They were large, humming with power now. But he knew that full capacity tests were needed. He ran a series of careful checks, monitoring temperature, pressure, and energy flow. The engines responded perfectly, the hum growing louder and steady. He smiled faintly. Almost ready, Lily. Almost ready. The aliens had begun to assist, carefully following his instructions. They did not fully understand the logic, but they could see the results. Where they had used brute force and complex calculations, Evan had used patience. Where they had forced systems to respond, Evan had let the ship guide him. Slowly, the alien engineers began to mimic his methods, though clumsily. The human had taught them something they could not have learned in years of study. Sometimes, understanding was more important than knowledge. Evan moved next to the defensive systems. These had been inactive for months, considered unreliable. Alien engineers had tested them and failed. Evan examined the panels and circuits, noticing small misalignments and minor power leaks. He adjusted the circuits carefully, rerouted energy flows, and tested responses. Lights on the control panels flickered, then stabilized. Shields hummed to life, energy barriers forming over critical points of the ship. Evan watched closely as each system came online, feeling satisfaction with each success. "Daddy, it's glowing," Lily said, pointing to the shield display. "Yes, Lily," Evan said. "It's ready. Just a little more work, and the ship will be stronger than ever." By midday, the ship's weapons systems were the final challenge. The alien engineers had assumed these systems were damaged beyond repair. The targeting arrays were misaligned, power conduits were blocked, and control software was corrupted. Most engineers had given up entirely. Evan approached with calm focus, his hands steady. He examined the arrays, checking alignment, energy flow, and response systems. He adjusted minor controls, cleared blockages, and rerouted energy. Slowly, the weapon systems powered up, responding fully. The Wayfarer Hale was now not only alive but fully armed and ready. The alien engineers were stunned. Their whispers grew louder, a mixture of disbelief and admiration. They had assumed humans were weak, incapable of understanding advanced technology. And yet here was proof to the contrary. One engineer stepped forward cautiously, touching a panel. "Human, your methods, they defy our understanding." Evan smiled faintly. "It's not magic. It's attention and care. The ship tells you what to do, if you take the time to listen." The alien engineers could not argue. They had seen the results with their own eyes. The ship, once abandoned and considered useless, was now fully functional, shields active, engines ready, and weapons systems operational. And it had been done by a human, using simple tools and observation. Evan moved to the main bridge. He sat in the captain's chair, testing controls and systems one by one. The ship responded perfectly. He glanced at Lily, who was now drawing a map of the ship, proud of her father's work. "Yes, Lily," Evan said. The alien engineers gathered around the bridge. Xylar spoke again, his voice quieter now. "Human, you have accomplished the impossible. We must acknowledge your skill." Red, Unlong. Evan nodded. "Thank you. But skill isn't everything. Attention, patience, care. Those are what matter. Anyone can learn that if they try. The rest of the day passed with minor tests. The ship responded flawlessly to navigation commands, power shifts, and defensive drills. Systems that had been dead for months now functioned perfectly. The aliens, though still unsure how to classify what they had seen, began to respect the human. They had never encountered such thinking before, and they realized that humans, underestimated and simple, had a unique advantage in solving problems. As night fell in the distant star corridor, the ship floated in quiet strength. The stars shone outside the windows, reflecting in the polished panels and smooth metal floors. Evan and Lily walked through the corridors, checking systems, noting small adjustments, and ensuring everything functioned as it should. The hum of the ship was steady and strong, a comforting vibration that traveled through the decks. "Daddy," Lily said, "do you think they will ever understand us?" Evan smiled. "Maybe not fully, Lily, but that's okay. They can see what we do, even if they don't understand how. And sometimes, seeing is enough." The aliens observed from a distance, quietly taking notes, whispering among themselves. They had learned more in 4 days than they had in decades of study. The human had taught them a lesson. Intelligence alone was not enough. Observation, patience, creativity, and care could achieve what formulas and tools could not. It was a lesson that would stay with them forever, even if they did not fully understand it. Evan returned to the main bridge for the final test, moving the ship. He ran the engines at half power, then full. The hum grew louder, vibrations steady. The Wayfarer hail responded perfectly, moving with smooth precision. The shields held. Weapons systems powered up, and navigation was flawless. He guided the ship through small maneuvers, testing each system. The ship moved as if it were alive, responding to his touch, his commands, and his attention. Lily watched from the co-pilot's seat, eyes wide. "Daddy, it's amazing." "Yes, Lily," Evan said, smiling. "It's alive, and we did it together." By the end of the day, the ship had completed a full systems check. Every function worked perfectly. The aliens, though still uncertain about the human methods, could not deny the results. The Wayfarer hail, once abandoned and useless, was now fully operational, powerful, and ready for any challenge. And it had been done by a human, a simple father, using nothing but observation, patience, and care. Evan looked at Lily, who hugged him tightly. "You did it, Daddy," she said softly. "Yes, Lily," he said, feeling a deep sense of pride. "We did it. Together. Too." The alien engineers, finally accepting the reality, bowed slightly. Xylar spoke, his tone respectful. "Human, you have taught us something important. Skill and knowledge are not everything. Observation, care, and patience can achieve what we cannot. We respect you." Evan nodded quietly. "Thank you. But the real credit goes to the ship. It told me what to do if I listened." The Wayfarer hail hummed in agreement. Lights steady, engines strong, weapons ready. It was alive, fully awake, and safe. And it was proof, for everyone who watched, that humans, simple, underestimated, patient humans, could achieve what even the greatest minds could not. As night deepened in the distant corridor of stars, Evan and Lily sat quietly in the bridge. The ship floated steadily, alive, and strong. It was more than a machine now. It was a symbol of what humans could do, a reminder that patience, care, and observation could make the impossible possible. And for the first time in a long time, the galaxy had a reason to respect humanity, not for power, not for weapons, but for the simple, quiet strength of a human father who refused to give up. And that was enough.